being selfish is a good thing sometimes. All right. My argument today is going to be about how being selfish can be a good thing in terms of the motivation to do something good for the world, right? So in my case, a lot of what I kind of have an argument with this concept is when I talk to people about the environment, right? I am someone who cares about the environment, but mostly because of how it affects me, right? And that's very selfish, right? It's very kind of egocentric, right? A friend of mine told me the other day about the difference between egocentric and selfish, right? Apparently, this kind of reasoning is egocentric rather than selfish. Apparently, egocentric means when you are having your own interests at heart, but it isn't necessarily negatively affecting other people, right? Whereas being selfish is having your own interests at heart and it is negatively affecting other people. It's at the expense of other people, right? So maybe what I mean to say is it's okay to be egocentric, or maybe egocentricism is a good thing, if that's the correct word. Egocentricism. Yeah, that's the right word. So yes, perhaps that's what I mean. So my argument behind my attitude towards environmentalism is the fact that I care about what my environment looks like. And my environment stems or kind of reaches beyond the borders of my room, the borders of my house, my environment, my local town, my area, and eventually the entire world, right? The actions that I have towards the world in terms of simple things like littering, right? Or using plastic disposable equipment for things will affect the planet that ultimately I live on, right? So it's kind of like, for me, dirtying my own home, if I can stretch that analogy far enough, right? So for me, the reason that I care about this kind of thing is the fact that it all comes round to affect me in the end, right? It kind of, well, there's an expression I have, it just, well, what goes around comes, it's not my expression, but it's an expression that I use often, what goes around comes around. And I've noticed that more and more with environmentalism, right? With kind of taking care to notice what your actions do to the environment is a lot more necessary now than ever before. Or maybe perhaps I've thought about it more now than I ever have before in my life, right? That might be more accurate to say. Because perhaps I thought in a way before that reasoned that the effects of my kind of, let's say I was less environmentally aware. If I threw away a bit of plastic into a bin and that kind of like, maybe contributed to ocean plastics or whatever, that effect was like downstream, right? It doesn't affect me because it's like, it's going to be in the ocean. I'm not going to be in the ocean. Like I don't really care about that. It's not going to come around to kind of get to me, is it? But then the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, what if I were to eat some like ocean fish, and that ocean fish has high levels of microplastics within its body, and that comes around to get to me purely because of the fact that human beings in general use a lot of plastics and they end up in the ocean, right? Like the fact that I'm health conscious enough to kind of avoid foods based on what they might contain, surely it would be a logical kind of step to make to say, okay, I don't want to contribute to that problem either. So in my life right now, I don't eat fish, generally speaking, because of the worries of, microplastics and heavy metal toxicity in these fish. And the truth is, these consequences have come about from human activity, right? And so I think that's a bad thing. I think that's a shame. Not only for me, but for the rest of humankind, but like primarily when we kind of think about this at a very base level, what you care about most is whether you live and what your health is like. And so because I care about myself in that way, I think it's a bit of a shame. I think it's a bit of a shame for the world. It was a bit of a shame for the fish. And so I can't then be a hypocrite and kind of not care about the plastic in that way. If I think it's a bad thing, then I should go all the way with that. I should think, okay, I should rather, drink water out of glass bottles and things like that, and stop using plastic as much as I can, and use, cotton as much as I can, right? In my clothing, for example, and my towels, my bed sheets and things like this, right? Because another thing as well that people don't think about is the fact that polyester materials and clothing and things like that is one of the biggest contributors to microplastics in the ocean. Bet you didn't know that, right? But I, as a selfish person, know about that because I'm being so selfish and considering the fact that, I don't want to mess up my planet, right? So in being a bit selfish, or maybe the technical term is egocentric, but I'll use it interchangeably from now on just to kind of set the tone there. Selfish is easier to say. In being selfish, I'm benefiting everyone around me, right? I have selfish motivations, but the outcome is for the greater good of everyone that lives on the planet, or every organism that lives on the planet, right? Because we've known, or we have discovered, that these plastics are toxic for us. Maybe it wouldn't matter as much to me if they weren't toxic and I could accept the fact that, there were microplastics in fish, right? Perhaps. But I still think it's a bit of a shame. I like to walk in nature. I like to kind of experience nature and the natural world. And so when I walk through the woods, when I walk down the beach, when I, take a visit to a national park, and I see a patch of rubbish, or someone's thrown a Coke can out of the window, or something like that, it's a bit of a shame to me, right? Like every morning I see, when I walk my dog, there are bits of sweets wrappers, like a Coke can half buried, or like a Lucozade bottle, like half buried in the mud. And what I do in my life is I pick up at least one piece of litter every day. I take it to one of the bins in that area. And sometimes I have to pick up some plastic or some dirt, some dirty piece of plastic in essence, and walk half a mile to find a bin and put it in there. Like the other day I found this, someone had just completely dumped a whole bunch of stuff into the woods somewhere, and a couple of years had gone by and it was half buried in the soil and the mud and things like that. So I had to kind of collect it in my hands, and it was a lot of rubbish. I had to walk like this with my hands held out in front of me for half a mile until I found a bin and put it in that bin, right? But that, for me, I'm not sure quite what motivated that, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a selfish origin in terms of the motivation. I want the woods where I walk to be nice. I want that to be a good place for the animals that live there, because I like the animals that live there, right? I like the animals that live there, right? It's kind of a selfish reasoning, but that's the thing. It ends up creating these kind of good behaviors, in terms of behaviors that are good for the overall environment, for the people, the animals, the nature, the things like that. It's what I see to be a good thing, right? So in this way, selfish motivations created action, whereas perhaps before in my life, when people campaign about, oh, don't you care about the world? Don't you, you need to care about this planet and the health of the planet because there's no planet B, all these kind of campaigns, they failed to reach me. I just didn't care enough, right? When people asked me, or kind of urged or encouraged me to be, what's this quality, sympathetic or kind of philanthropic perhaps, I don't know what the word is for this kind of thing, just kind of giving just because you're supposed to or it's good to, right? That was just kind of vague to me. I was like, yeah, I can kind of see it's a good thing, but I don't really care. And then there was this other story that I was told because of the fact that, or the story of the fact that this rubbish or this kind of awful stuff in the environment is affecting me almost directly because of like the food I eat, the clothes I wear, and the effect it has on my kind of my hormonal system, right? They've done research on polyester clothing, and apparently it affects the way that your hormones are kind of balanced, right? And these kind of things, right? These kind of generally toxic things like plastic, like the kind of detergent we use, the bleach kind of stuff that is bad for the environment, also happens to be bad for us as well, using it in our own homes, right? And so through the selfish motivation of like, okay, this stuff, it's affecting you directly in your health. That's what got me to change. That's what got me to be like, okay, now I care about the environment, right? Not years and years of like, okay, you've got to be a kind person, not to make fun of them. I think they're, doing a noble thing, and they kind of have this kind of image of giving and kindness and like, nature preservation, whatever it is. Cool, amazing. But maybe there's a marketing problem there for certain people like me who don't we don't normally, or we don't tend to resonate with that kind of message. I resonate with a message that's like, okay, this stuff is affecting you directly. It's like right on your doorstep, right? You throw away a bit of plastic, it's right there. It's your dirt. You're living in amongst it, right? So for me, I'm like, okay, that's urgent. That makes sense. That is something I need to change right now. So that's the reasoning behind this argument, right? Sometimes selfish reasoning or selfish motivations, or a selfish reasoning is a good motivation if it allows you or motivates you to do something good for the world, right? But there's a way of checking that with your own kind of moral compass. It's this argument that everything they do is ultimately selfish, right? Even if you're kind to the old lady crossing the street, it may be argued that it's because it gives you a sense of fulfillment, a sense of you've helped somebody and it makes you happy. And so perhaps there is no truly selfless act, because by being selfless, you're giving yourself something good in terms of the feel-good emotions in your brain. And so there's no such thing as a selfless act, right? So if we extend that further, and if we think about morality, if we think about the fact that doing good makes us feel good, then I think we can extend that selfish argument further, right? Doing good ultimately gives us the most happiness in life, in terms of fulfillment, in terms of the lack of guilt, the lack of stress to do with lying and cheating and stealing and doing bad things and being a criminal or whatever. Doing good is what brings us the most happiness, right? Being transparent, being truthful, being honest, being straight, right? And so, considering that, it's in your own interest to be good. It's in your own interest to care about something like the environment, for example. It's in your own interest to form something of value or create something of value to people, right? And so if there is something in your life that you think is good for you to do, and you're feeling like it's like, a bit of a struggle, sometimes the motivation needs to be marketed as something selfish. How is this going to help me? Right? I know that's very selfish, that it seems like something that's not good for people to kind of think about, but it's a reality. A lot of the things that motivate us the most are selfish things, right? Like self-preservation, like reproduction of like our own genetic material. They're all selfish things, right? So if we can market ourselves to do the good things because of selfish reasons, I think we have a greater chance of achieving success in those areas. And if you want to market something great that you're doing, then market it as something that benefits that person directly, something that's very selfish or kind of selfishly benefits them, right? Don't tell them, oh, by doing this, you're making the world a better place. Tell them, by doing this, you'll become a better person. You'll be respected by the people around you. You'll be loved. You'll be cared for. You'll be amazing. You will have this dent on the world. Like, focus on the person and their outcomes, right? Don't focus on this like vague, nebulous idea of like, okay, say, save the planet, save the environments, the ecosystems, right? Just because it's a good thing to do. Make it relevant to them. Make it relevant to who they are. So both ways, convincing yourself or convincing other people, it is sometimes imperative and often effective to appeal to their selfish desires, right? It's often the case when you're talking to someone that, even in normal conversation, not just in marketing, you ought to not you ought to, but it's better to make someone feel good about themselves. It's better to make someone feel important. This comes along in listening skills, right? Just to be able to listen to somebody and make them feel like what they're saying is interesting is a very great skill to have, because then they feel listened to. They feel like, oh, this guy's actually listening to me. This guy's actually wanting to know what I have to say. That's amazing, right? And so these skills will bring you far in life. And they come from somewhat selfish motivations. And considering the fact that other people have those same selfish motivations as well. It's an understanding of psychology. It's not a like a mean, vindictive thing to kind of, only look out for yourself. It's the fact that you know that what motivates you most is probably something to do with selfish desires. And you know that about other people as well, so that you can kind of consider that as well, right? Make them feel more important. Make them feel like they are interesting. Consider what they want to get out of life. Consider what they want in general, right? And I'm not going to get into kind of like the manipulation and things like that, because, well, here's the thing. A lot of people think that manipulation is like necessarily a bad thing. But here's another thing, right? Manipulation can lead people to good outcomes. Manipulation doesn't mean the fact that you're controlling someone to do something negative for them, right? It doesn't mean that you're controlling them to take advantage of them and then they end up in somewhere that is, or some place that is worse than they were before. Sometimes you can like manipulate someone to like, do something good, right? For example. So like, whoever told me about the fact that environmentalism helps me, they technically manipulated me to care about the environment. But I don't mind. I don't care. That's great. Fantastic. I appreciate that. Right? I don't think manipulation as a blanket thing is a bad thing. Right? It has negative connotations because of how it's used in our vocabulary today. But perhaps it needs a rebrand, and maybe you should call it marketing or sales or something like that, right? I need to market this idea as a different kind of thing to you, and then you'll be convinced, right? So notice that and realize that. It's okay for you to have selfish desires and for you to use that to do things that are good. It's okay for you to understand that other people have those selfish desires as well. They're human beings. We are inherently somewhat selfish, right? And so to appeal to those, those qualities, I guess, is wise, because they are true. So concluding points here. A lot of what is good to do in the world is also good for you, right? And don't feel so bad if you feel like you ask yourself the question, what's in it for me? That's a natural question to ask, and that's completely fine. And understanding that will help you understand how to interact with other people as well, because they will ask themselves the question, what's in it for me? Right? So to understand what's in it for them, then you'll be able to converse with them in a way that's more effective, because you understand that principle. Right? And it's not a selfish, it's not, well, the whole point is that it's a selfish thing. It's not a negative thing, is what I was going to say. Right? It's perhaps you could call it a manipulation. I like to call it a marketing, right? A rebranding of the idea, so that it's more appealing to them, for them to do a good thing, for them to do something that's beneficial for them. Right? Our inherent desires are often selfish, but that isn't a negative thing. That isn't a bad thing. So use that to your advantage, and use that understanding of the fact that people look out for themselves, which is only natural. People care about the things that they care about, and the things that are around them, that are close to them, their friends, their family, their environment, and that might stretch beyond, and you might have to kind of tell them that story, because people might not be aware. Like I was before. I wasn't aware that environmental kind of awareness affected me until someone told me. So I needed that person to make me aware of it. So you can do that to other people in your life as well, and take advantage of the fact that their desires are often selfish. I hope that makes sense. I kind of rambled a bit there in terms of like going across different points, but hopefully it tied it together in the end there. The fact is, in conclusion, having selfish desires is perfectly reasonable and rational. It's natural, and it's the way that we live. It's basic psychology. If we don't understand why we do something, or what's in it for us, then it's hard for us to motivate us or ourselves to do that thing. That's natural human psychology, right? So to have selfish reasons to do something is not negative. And to understand that about other people makes you a more effective communicator. So with that being said, I think that's all I have to say today. So keep thinking, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.